My name is Caitlin. I'm the art director for the Oxford Arts Alliance. I'd like to introduce you all to our juror for the 7th Annual National Juried Exhibition, Mr. Charles Goolsby, Professor of Art at Emory and Henry College and Chair of Division of Visual and Performing Arts. Mr. Goolsby will take it away with a very creative PowerPoint that he made.
Welcome everyone, and first of all, just start off by saying how much I appreciate everyone who entered. Even if you did not get selected for the show, thank you for entering, because when you get right down to it, this is truly a collaboration. I mean, when I was starting out in art, I never really much thought about a juried art show as being a collaboration. I always thought of it as like being one of those things where some big powerful juror came in and they made these decisions based on some big cause that they perhaps had or whatever, and then sometimes I made the cut and sometimes I didn't, and then sometimes I got mad when I didn't make the cut, and then sometimes I was just very excited when I did. But collaboration is the best way to look at this, because frankly I can't make selections if no one enters, right? And then no one can even submit if the organization doesn't put it together, right? So bottom line is like it's really a process that that we're all engaged in all together, and it kind of comes together, and it's kind of special because it can never possibly come in the same way every time. It's going to come in differently. So that's an important thing to remember. And when we get to the work that won the first place award this year, the point in time is really huge. So that's part of the process too, point in time. And what happens next year might be quite different. And with a different juror, it very well could be very different. So I like to think of the juried show as just one of those special things, one part of the art world. It's an opportunity for us all to kind of get together. And one thing that happens for certain is we have the opportunity to build some community here. If we don't use these opportunities to build community, we're really losing something. And I want you to know that in my experience, and I've been at this for a good 45 years now, in my experience, absolutely amazing to me how many connections I've made through either juried shows or artist residencies, and these are lifelong connections, and it's not some big competition where we're all out to get each other. It's actually a wonderful place and a wonderful way that we can get together and actually learn about each other and support each other. So I want to encourage everyone to do that. What is a juried show good for? One thing it's good for is to test some of your creative waters. Like whenever I do something that's a little bit off the beaten path that I've never tried before, a juried show is a great place to try it out, because, like, you know, if you get rejected, then you just get this email or you get a letter in the mail and nobody has to know about it, so it's secret, and that's really cool. And then if it's a rip-roaring success, then it's like, wow, maybe that is a direction I want to pursue in my work. So I think a juried show is a great place to test out experiments. Another thing a juried show is good for is it gives us an opportunity to raise questions, and it causes us to look at things in new ways. So juried shows aren't perfect though, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the limitations of a juried show. Number one that you need to know is, like, I looked at this process as like, this is what the Oxford Arts Alliance gave me. So I didn't go searching you out on the internet. I didn't like try to dive into your personal lives or any of that. I just used the data that the Oxford Arts Alliance gave me. And so that means that when I'm looking at your work, I'm just looking at these images that you submitted, and I'm not assessing a greater body of work because I don't know what that is. And your greater body of work, I think, speaks to your core values as an artist and your core values as an individual and what kind of direction you're pursuing. So I don't think a juried show necessarily does a very good job of that. So in other words, I have very, very limited data to work with. What you submitted, the sizes of it, the media that you listed, that's basically what I had. All right, another thing that's different is that so many of us are from so many different communities from all over the place. I think a lot of times art movements and art things and art development and artistic development, I think that occurs in communities. I'll give you an example, and this is like a really old-fashioned example, I'm sorry, but if I take like Greenwich Village in New York, back in the 1950s and 1960s, those artists formed a community. They formed, you know, abstract expressionism. They were able to get together. They were able to party with each other, and communities do make a huge difference. And I'm not in your community, and you're not necessarily in my community, and sometimes those communities might overlap, but our experiences are going to be very, very vastly different, and the communities that we're in means that we have all kinds of different perspectives of thinking about art and looking at art. I think juried shows are limited in that I don't know that they ultimately have like a tremendously significant impact on art history. So there are lots of ways that that happens, but even though this is a national show and that kind of thing, I don't know that it's going to be a launching pad for you to get into like a giant museum somewhere. It's just like one of the limitations of it. I remember I once won a show when I was very, very young. It was the Virginia Watercolor Society. It was a statewide show, and I won Best in Show, and there was this big banquet the night before, and I was really surprised that I won it, and I was all happy and everything. But the truth of the matter is the next morning I was in my backyard cleaning up after my puppy dog. So it just didn't like launch me into like the stratosphere in terms of artistic success. And it's probably, I guess if I had any advice, it would be it's more about the long run than it is any one specific event or one show. You do hear things like, you know, the Armory show in the early 20th century making a difference and that kind of thing. You do hear things like the Salon of Paris back in the 19th century. But in our case with shows such as these, I don't think that they're going to launch us into the bigger art world like we're always hoping to. So that's a weakness of the juried art show sort of structure. And then the other thing I think is a little bit challenging about juried art shows is the award structures, like first place, second place, third place. Again, point in time makes a difference. I don't know if, I mean, it was interesting. I chose the awards in September, and I didn't like want to go back on them or anything last night when I was working on this talk, but it's always possible that I might feel differently next year or something. So the award structure is also an interesting component of this. I just want you to realize that there are other art worlds out there, and this is just one of them. And the other thing I want you to realize is like I'm one juror, and it's just one opinion. It's like my set of experiences coming together, and it's complicated. It really is. And if you ever want to do something that's really complicated, enter a show with 3 jurors in it. It's like I've juried shows that way, and it's always interesting because you got to get 3 people to agree on something, and artists don't like to compromise. This is something I've learned. Other contexts you should maybe think about, there's always something like New York, there's something like Paris, there's something like Rome, there's something like Tokyo, there's something like you have the whole world to explore, so don't leave it out. You have the internet to explore. There are artists who are practicing on Pinterest. There are artists that are practicing on Facebook, Instagram. Then you can also have major city dealers like Gagosian and Pace Gallery. There are regional galleries, and there are local frame shops. And then I've seen a lot of work on sale on Etsy. Then there's me, yeah, the juror. You probably kind of think you know a lot about me because you probably maybe read my bio in the prospectus for the show, and maybe you even looked me up. And but I remember when I entered juried shows, it was always like, what is that person looking for? You know, you just like, what is that person looking for? I entered a show once that was judged by Clement Greenberg, and I thought he was going to look for like pure painting and flatness, but no, he was looking for green that particular time. But what is that person looking for? And it is complicated because I have core values, and I'm not even sure I should like try to apply those for other artworks, you know. I just like know what my core values are. So I'll start out with number one, and this is really important to me. Number one, art for me is a fusion. It's a combination of content or the idea and form. And keep in mind, there are people out there who think one way or the other even, but I think it's bringing together those two things. I want meaning in the work. I want form in the work. And that's maybe old school, but that's what I want. And that's something I value a lot. I have an interesting background in that I've lived long enough at this point that I've lived through 3 art periods so far. I've lived through modernism. And I've kind of rejected that kind of like path that maybe some of my teachers put me on. I mean, they tried to explain to me that modernism is like working towards some sort of ultimate perfect art. It started the beginnings kind of with Picasso or something, and everything got flatter and flatter and flatter, and then you had Greenberg and it became pure and blah, 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 blah. And anything with a subject in it was terrible, you know, and, you know, even Andy Warhol disproved that. But bottom line is that I grew up during some of that. And then the major period during most of my life has been postmodernism. And then what are we even in now? We are questioning our existence. And I keep hearing that since the phone now looks like this, which this looks nothing like what I grew up with as a telephone. It used to have like a cable attached to it that stuck into the wall. But ever since the invention of these digital devices, are we in a new period of art called meta-modernism, or are we in a period of art called pomo-mo? And I'm still sort of like trying to figure some of that out. But I do value aspects of each, and I think you'll see some of this in the jurying of the show. I mean, if you did any research on me, you kind of know that I'm a painter and a printmaker. But then if you look at the show, you'll see that I tried to pick from a variety of genres, a variety of subject matters, a variety of ideas, and so I value aspects of all of those things. So here's the next thing I value, and this is absolute. I don't think art can, and I don't even know how you really determine it, but I value it. But no artist can be, to me, real if they don't have this. You've got to have sincerity. You've got to have authenticity. You got to show me that you care. But authenticity is really super important, and I try to kind of sense like, am I getting this from this work? And I don't know if I am or not, but I try. And these are subjective things, I know, except this one isn't subjective for me. This next thing is I look for truth. And it's not my truth. I actually don't think that I don't think I understand the truth yet. I think it's something I seek, but I don't think truth is like necessarily one thing for somebody and something different for another. I think there is a truth out there. I think a truth that is absolute is what I'm searching for. So that's something I value. Now this is one thing that I think you're gonna like think I'm nuts over, but I am absolutely more curious about things that I don't fully understand. I'm actually open to the ideas in work that keep me thinking, more so than things that offer me a complete solution. So if I don't fully understand some of the things that I've picked, that's okay, because I'm still thinking about them. It doesn't mean that I just don't have it all resolved yet, but I think that's good. So things that keep me thinking, I think are really super important. All right, next thing, I think art should be transformative. If it is good, then I think we should come out the other side of it as a deeper human being. If we are somehow changed in the process of experiencing art, I think that's really important. I get frustrated by people who apply absolute conditions in their assessment. So, in other words, let me give you some examples. These are things I find faulty, like conceptualism is clever one-liners. You know, people who say that, I just reject that. Or formalism is meaningless. I reject that. Modernism is a trajectory towards purity, and I already talked about that. I reject that. I think all of those things are just very, very limiting. And now, the next thing, and I think you'll see this in the work that I picked, I think. I love beauty, and I hate superficial. So for me, beauty is part of that search for truth. It's not something superficial. I want my coffee really strong, and I want my wine really red. I tell my students this all the time. Artists should have a voice. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're in your 20s, you've necessarily found it yet, or even if you're in your 30s and your 40s, but you should have a voice. Like Jasper Johns has a voice. Like you know a Jasper Johns when you see a Jasper Johns. You know a Rauschenberg when you see a Rauschenberg. You know an Anselm Kiefer when you see an Anselm Kiefer. So I think artists should have a voice. And you know Dolly Parton when Dolly Parton sings. Or you know Bob Dylan when Bob Dylan sings. Or you know Aretha Franklin when Aretha Franklin sings. So when you make art, we want to know that it's your voice. We want to know it's you singing. The next thing about judging a show I think is really interesting is I have to be open to the idea that the art may have to look very bad to be good. So that's something I always ask myself. It's like if I'm having a reaction like that is really, really bad, then I look at it extra hard because I keep thinking like, okay, that is stepping outside the bounds of what we consider normal art. But art can't be normal. If art is normal, then it's not art. I intended to do something is what people say to me all the time. Like, I intended, my students intend. They'll say, this is my intent. And I'll say, but this is what I'm getting out of it. So when I'm talking about some of these works today, if I'm really far off base and you intended something different, maybe I just didn't get it right. Or maybe, you know, you need to run it by some other people. But I don't think the ultimate content in art is necessarily what the artist intended. I think the meaning in art is a little more open than that, and I think that you can do your best, but we might not always get what you want from it. I'm not sure I know what the rules of this show were, because I didn't read them, because I'm not sure art should have rules. So if your painting came out 1 inch bigger than it was supposed to be entered in the show, I have no idea. The next thing I want to say is in terms of genres, medias, and that kind of thing, I love and I respect them all. These are in alphabetical order that we picked. It struck me as a shrine in kind of like honor. Of course, the Salvator Mundi is a Leonardo da Vinci painting that's recently come to light, but I looked at this and I looked at the different media that the artist used and was trying to think about, like, okay, what is the savior of the world here? Is it the microcontroller? Are it the digital sensors? The tablet? I felt like it was a really wonderful combination of materials, and I thought it raised really, really interesting ideas about like what's important in our world. And it really came together quite beautifully in kind of a traditional way. This piece is almost 6 feet tall, you know, so when you see it on the screen like this, it feels a little compressed to me just because I just imagine it being much bigger, you know, just based on the size listed here. But the combination of materials was quite strong and beautiful, and I had wondered if anything moved, or I wondered how the interaction of the electronic parts worked. So, and in this one, I thought the artist did a great job of creating kind of like a new world, a world that was really quite beautiful, a world that was about growth. I really enjoyed like the color, really enjoyed the combination of textures, and I've never actually done scanner photography personally myself, but I've seen other examples of it, and I just thought this was really, really quite stunning in the way that it came together. I picked this because it was a really humble subject done by an artist who obviously really super duper cared about it. Um, it takes commitment to paint something like this, and out of all of the, I guess, realistic representational paintings, I really did sense that the artist just really cared, and that is something I value. So there seemed to be some sort of sense of like authenticity in terms of how this artist approached this, and every aspect of it is just so extremely well done. So it's those factors that had me bring it into the show. This one was actually another one where the artist was absolutely technically in control of what they did, but it was disturbing. And that's the part that appealed to me. It's like, okay, so this is going to be like kind of like all this beautiful, well-rendered stuff, but then the pills, and it wasn't clear to me whether the pills were jumping into the spout or if they were coming out of the spout. But the combination of the pills with the teacup and what appears perhaps to be honey, it just like it was just very kind of surrealistic and very kind of disturbing. So that was kind of what I got from this one. All right. In this one, I absolutely enjoyed the color palette of it, and I enjoyed the texture of it, and I enjoyed like just kind of like the sense of weather that was present in it. In this one, I thought like again it was the texture and it was the color, and I know those are very formal concerns, but it also seems like a person who's probably at a point in their lives where there's a whole lot of experimentation going on, and I just thought it was really quite beautifully done. In this one, I really enjoyed the physicality of it, and I really enjoyed the kind of push and pull. It kind of is a little bit reminiscent of like earlier Hans Hofmann, just really kind of like gutsy, very confident, very strong in terms of the way that the actual paint is applied and handled. So that appeals to like the kind of abstract expressionist part in me. And this one here, um, I thought this was one of the more, I'm going to call it idiosyncratic, that is not meant to be a negative. Obviously, I picked it for an award. Seemed like an ambitious piece, but it also struck me as like this artist had a voice, and I really appreciated that. And it it just really resonated with me in terms of the limited palette, and it resonated with me in terms of the abstraction and the imagery, and it frankly a lot of it, even though it's called Bad Birdie, it kind of seems a little bit fun to me, quite frankly, and maybe that's kind of messed up for me, but I really think it's very interesting and unusual work. Same thing with this one. Who could think of a figure like this? And I was just like the combination of the negative space and the kind of marks that were going on back there, the color versus the black and white, and frankly the cartooniness of it. So made it distinguished from some of the other work. This artist seems to have a voice. For this, this pairing is obviously very intentional. I thought, from what I could see in the electronic the glazes are really quite stunning. Um, I would say the glaze has a definite painterly look to it. In fact, I think in my experience, like if I couldn't be a painter, I would want to be a ceramist because of the glazes. The colors are just absolutely great. And then in this case, I really enjoyed the way the two forms were working in concert with each other. And I was very conscious of the space between the forms as well as the forms themselves. And in this one, I really felt like it was really beautiful in its awkwardness. And I like this idea, the fear of the unknown, and the way that it just seemed so, it seemed so awkward in a way. And then I really enjoyed that. And I thought the colors were absolutely stunning, the combination of the cool blues with that ochre in that part that's just like going out into the ocean, into the abyss, and it's kind of ambiguous. In this one, I enjoyed the sequence. I have painted on location myself, and I imagine this as having been painted on location. I imagine the individual panels maybe being painted, they could have been painted all in the same day, but I like the idea of exploring a very similar scene with different light, and I've enjoyed seeing the repetition of the images all put together, and the confidence in the brush mark, and the confidence in the gesture. Um, all of those things I thought worked really well. In this one, even though it's a black and white, I was impressed with the fact that it's a woodcut. I've done a lot of printmaking myself, and I just think this a woodcut, this is absolutely stunning, but in any medium it would be stunning in terms of the textural detail, the textural variation, and the sense of light and the design of it. All of it just comes together beautifully, and that's a pretty good size print. It's 14 by 21 inches. Um, but yeah, I just thought like that came together very, very nicely, and it's interesting. It's a very abstract work, even though it comes off as a very realistic work. This one had a sense of sadness, when I looked at it. And I thought like I'd like to kind of maybe talk to this artist a little bit more and get their impression on it. But it's just like the way the images are juxtaposed with each other, some of them more definite, the human figure, of course, on the right, the human figure kind of like silhouetted in the negative space with a little bit of, well, a lighter form of that human figure. It's almost like possibly it's about death, it's about memory, it's about things that could have been, and it's just really quite, it's a little bit haunting. I really like the idea of art taking very ordinary things and kind of transforming them in some way. And I think the artist, for an orange or a tangerine and apple maybe in the foreground and the light coming and hitting the orange. I really like the sense of lost and found edges in this one. I like the modernist geometry in it, and I like I just like it's just ordinary stuff, but I think that this is really transformed into something really quite beautiful. And this one had maybe the best title of all of the works submitted. I just think like, and I looked at this and I thought like, okay, this is just texturally just fabulous and stunning. And again, it's a fairly good sized piece. And I'd love to see this one in person too. But I really like I like the way the tighter calligraphic kinds of forms are added in on top of the looser, splashier color kinds of things. This work is really quite stunning, and I'd love to see this in person too. I really, really think that the it just captures kind of like the sectioning of a tree that has been taken down or has fallen. It really kind of brings out the essence of the textural kinds of bark and growth. The way that it's put together is absolutely intriguing to me. On the end of it, I'm calling it the end, but the cut section of it, all of that, I'm having a hard time sort of sensing how that really does come together. But again, seeing this in person would really make a huge difference for me. But as far as a form goes, this is just absolutely, in terms of its use of repetition and the way it's constructed, and it just really evokes kind of like a sectioned part of the natural world that has been removed from the natural world. So this one here is really gorgeous for its mark making and the contrast of mark making, but also its color. It's called Ready to Howl, but it also feels like it could be something very much tied to the natural world and the processes of the natural world as well. And cyberspace. This one I really thought well, I don't know. It's kind of like collagey. It's kind of like Rosenquist-like. And then when I looked at the size of it at 4 feet by 4 feet, I thought well, that would be more impressive. So I really think that the scale I'd like to see this in person, 4 by 4 feet. And then it's very dynamic in terms of its energy, and it uses all of those things, that we see in advertisement and that sort of thing. And I don't know, I thought it was a pretty creative collage kind of work. And then it's been put together on canvas, so great color. And this one here, I'd like to know a little bit more about the story, but it's just a fabulous portrait, fabulous lighting, fabulous interior. You kind of sense that, this individual is waiting for someone, or maybe there's somebody else that should be in the picture who isn't. Maybe there's somebody missing. I don't know. There's a sense of loss in this one too. And kind of a interesting contrast between internal and external world and where are we. Nice kind of complementary color contrast too. This is the one I picked for first place. This work is haunting, and it's haunting because it basically talks about 9/11. And this has been the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and when I juried the show, it was pretty close to 9/11. And I'm very conscious of 9/11 because that event, even though I wasn't there, my birthday is September 11. So all of this has kind of come together in kind of a strange way, but I just cannot get this out of my head. And this is a work where text and image come together, and this is a work that I honestly, and I say this, this is a work that I don't fully understand yet, and don't know that I ever will. I just know that it haunts me, and I think you might find that too.
The meter maid lets out a piercing, heart-wrenching wail. Then another. Feeling her anguish, my eyes flood with tears. She begins to walk aimlessly, shoes dragging on the sidewalk, her lips jabbering something. The balloons swing frantically as she stumbles between them and leans helplessly against the storefront. The crowd looks on as she weeps uncontrollably. The balloons resume their lazy stance. Two women slowly approach and attempt to console her. A sign in the window next to her reads, "Welcome to the Balloon Saloon, voted most fun store in New York City." Lying in my bed that night, I close my eyes. I see the man in the white shirt and black pants living his last moments. Over and over in slow motion. The woman stood there for what seemed like minutes, then held down her skirt and stepped off the ledge. The repetitive roar of the crowd. The couple holding hands. Who were they? Compelled to watch out of respect for them. To turn away would be wrong.
I think I watched that film maybe 7 or 8 times during the jurying process in its entirety, and very, very haunting. I think one of the questions that it raised for me is that even though I'm against suicide, if I were on that New York building with a hole in it burning, would it be wrong to jump? And I don't have a question. I don't have an answer for that question either. But this film really does make one ask questions, and all of the imagery in it speak to a time before anyone could imagine such an event happening. And it also speaks to, like, it also spoke to me like if I were standing on that ledge having to make that decision, what kind of memories would be the last memories in my mind before I had to do that. So I just think, like, I'm actually getting chills talking about this. So, but that was the piece that kind of struck the strongest emotional chord with me as I was jurying the show. And thank you. In this one here by Whitney Proud, I really enjoyed the just beautiful kind of drawing with paint and the layers and the kind of the way the colors kind of came together. And yeah, just really beautiful calligraphic line in the way that's handled. This one here, the neap tide, I had to look up what a neap tide was. I didn't know, but it's the point where the gravity of the moon makes the difference between the tides the least distance. And what I liked about this is the way that it kind of comes off as a painting and a physical object simultaneously. And I like the abstraction in it. In this one here, this is something that I'm just very interested in. I really like the, I really enjoyed the way that hand-stitched beads on quilting cotton with embroidery. I love the way traditional media by an artist, by women artists, were incorporated in this piece and to create a statement of fine art. And I want to see this one in person too, because it has a lot more dimension than I'm seeing on the screen. It looks so flat, and according to the dimensions, it comes out 2 inches. So I would love to see, is it the flower that comes out 2 inches?
It's, yeah, the flower stands out about 2 inches. And it is done in what they call stump work. It's my first stump work flower, so it's a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Crude, yes.
Well, crude is not a word that I would use to describe this. I think you're, I think the tonalities and the facial tonalities in the flesh and all of that is just remarkable.
Thank you.
And I still like the idea of, like, something that is like taking the ordinary and transforming it into something that's a little bit more poetic and beautiful. And that's what appealed to me about this work. And I like the kind of ambiguity in it as well. In this one here, I thought, like, so I go to museums all the time, but my question is like, is this a straight shot or is this a collage thing done digitally? But I like the relationship of the sculpture in the distance with the relationship of the sculpture in the foreground and the tension that is created there. And I thought too that this was one of the most unusual compositions in the show.
It is a straight shot. It's not collaged. I just cropped from the bottom. This is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. They have a giant hall with ancient sculptures, and I just walked into it, and this was at one angle. Both of these were, I was able to capture both of them.
All right, thank you. I was thinking that might be the case. I see this a lot, but I've never actually photographed anything like this myself. And but I thought it was a very, very interesting capture, and I like the way that the proportions of the heads are working with each other. It's very unusual. And this one here, this is really strange because this is another work I do not fully understand, but I'm assuming that each of the images on the installation itself work with the concepts that we see in the title, or at least what was presented as the title on the bottom, which you can see is pretty daggone complicated. And then this is going to be the weirdest comment you'll probably ever hear about your work, but in a lot of ways this reminds me of a Matisse cutout, and it's because of the simplicity of shape and the design of it. And anyway, it was really kind of a neat piece. This is, I think, the last one in the show. This is really great in terms of the way it takes a just fence and it creates a whole new world out of that space. And I know it's a digital print of the sculpture, but I just thought this was just one of those instances where there is a complete reinvention of that space and a complete transformation. And in the image of the digital print anyway, the color is fabulous in terms of its complementary colors as well.
Theo Artz, you had questions about his piece. He was here when I spoke about it. He commented that he is here, so perhaps he can speak on his piece some.
I'm here. If you can hear me,
Yes.
I'm open for questions.
Oh, I'm just curious, could you talk a little bit maybe about the intended meaning that you have with your work?
With this particular piece? Yeah. Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty frontal. It's largely a thing about the Salvador Mundi piece that was sold for $450 million. That to me was really atrocious. Said a lot of negative things about the art world, about secondary market and everything. But without going too deep in the weeds here, it plays the idea that from a lot of people's perspective out there, looking at the Salvador Mundi piece, I don't know. Again, I don't want to go into the whole history of it, but the woman who restored it, Diane Modestini, pretty much made her own picture as it goes. So whether or not it's to be considered an actual Leonardo or not, it is part of the problem here. But the other side of this, again, is that how it was bought. It was bought secretly at the auction, anonymously. As it turned up, it was by it's now owned by a sheikh who's Muslim, who doesn't really doesn't appreciate the imagery itself to begin with. So there's also theories that it may have been destroyed. The painting might have been destroyed. Anyway, there's a lot of secretive things, a lot of things, a backstory of this. So again, I could digress for hours on that. But what I'm trying to do is set up something that looks like kind of reminiscent of a religious tabernacle, somewhere between a tabernacle and a puppet show theater, puppet show theater. And then I like it to look like also that there's an architectural model element to it. In other words, the scrim that's down below, that's printed, fabric printed, has text on it, Latin phrases that actually are different than what's in the background that it represents, as if it's being restored like the facade of a museum, which you see a lot in Europe. You don't see it so much in the United States. But when they do these extensive renovations of the facades of museums, they'll often go to the expense of having the entire image of the museum actually printed on large physical scrims that they then drape on the scaffolding. So it looks like, well, it's sort of a virtual version of the actual museum. So there's that, and again, and I won't go on and on here, but there's the video that plays and the lights that light up are all driven by a motion sensor and a microcontroller. I heard you ask about that, so maybe I should return to that point. So the technology behind it is in there to basically change the presentation as a viewer approaches the actual artwork. So for what it's worth, it's a very subtle thing almost. You don't really have to look for it, I guess. But the lighting is programmed to change from green, as in the allure of money and filthy lucre, in the art world, to what if you come up really closely to really inspect the painting or the representation of the painting in the video, the lights turn like a warning red, kind of, stay away, don't get so close to this artwork, it's too precious, that kind of thing. So anyway, and the final thing I'll say is, if anybody actually goes physically look at it, the Latin phrases, I figure in this day and age, most people have at their fingertips like an online translator like Google Translate, so they can easily read the Latin, plug them into their translator, and get the kind of hidden messages that are in here, these kind of political art political messages there. So now that's a long-winded answer to a short question. So,
well, one of my thoughts that I had is like, is it really like, is it a shrine to fakery, or is it a shrine to the real thing?
No, that's pretty much on topic right there. Yeah, it's about the not so much a forgery, but the fact that over the ages, this painting that has risen to be the most expensive painting ever sold at auction at that point, it's not really the painting that it's made out to be. So yeah, there's inauthenticity there. That's really seriously in the message.
All right, thank you.
Now that we watched the trailer for Thomas's film, we should have Thomas speak about his film.
Thank you, Caitlin. Charles, I thought it was interesting what you said in your opening remarks about the relationship of point in time. Because at the time of 9/11, I was very stagnant artistically. I was teaching spiritual practices, but I wasn't making physical art. And I was very envious because so many artists were making art about the 9/11 attack. And now that 20 years has passed, I remember being ready to hit the send button to send that film out, and just pausing with my finger on the button thinking, gee, is this a little bit too much? And when you talked about point in time, it made me realize how now is the right time for it. In fact, when I was doing the research for the film, I remembered, because I'd read an article of an artist who had done a sculpture called The Falling Woman, which was very beautiful. And it was placed in Rockefeller Center. And within a few weeks, it was removed because of outrage and threats.
Was that Eric Fischl's sculpture?
I believe so, yes. So it feels just right that, I made it this year and it came out now. And then when you made some comments about suicide, it was really interesting, all the different points of view that came up in my research. There was a fire marshal talking on the subject of people who jumped out of the tower. And his comment was, he said, if you're in that kind of intense heat and smoke, you are out of there. That's all there is to it. And then what I've learned through spiritual practices is the difference between the intelligence of the mind and the intelligence of the body. And lots of times when we think about something, we're so wrong. We think that we would be standing there making an intellectual choice, even though part of us is very much wired in the same way that we respond when we do something like put a hand on top of a hot stove. We don't actually make the choice to take the hand off the stove. It just happens. The body actually makes the choice for us. So I thought that was interesting. And I tried to put different points of view into the film. And then another interesting thing that came up in my research, but it was not presented in the film, is the medical examiner declared all the people who died in the attack, including the people who jumped, as having been murdered. So I thought that was very beautiful and very respectful.
Can you talk just briefly about the selection of images that were juxtaposed against the verbal text that you were doing? Like, why did you choose those images?
Yes. So some of the images I chose just because they were very beautiful. Some of the clips I chose just because they were very long. And then where I really had fun playing with it was the placement of where they are in relationship to the story. So one placement is the long clip of the train going through the tunnel is very specifically placed where it turns into more of a subjective, ethereal dream type state. And of course, starting with the bookends of the child at the beginning and the end.
Well, art is not always comfortable. Yes. I mean,
life is not always comfortable. So it's, yes. This has so often been something that I've thought about and been working with a little bit. And it's difficult for other people to talk about it. A lot of times they just put up a wall and say, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to go there.
Now the plan is to do a Q&A. In order to do that, I would like you all who have questions to use the reaction button at the bottom right of your screen. Click it and click the raise hand, and then I'll unmute you and you can ask your question. Okay, Anita?
Hi, Thomas. I wanted to say a few things to you and ask you a question. I saw your video Friday night at the opening. The story, the way you told it, your voice and the narration were extremely moving. It created images in my mind. And it brought 9/11 to reality in a different way, in a personal way. But I felt then the images I was seeing in the video were so different. They were New York, but they were so removed for me from 9/11 that it created for me some dissonance. And I was hoping to understand better why you chose those particular scenes of old New York, even before the towers were built.
Part of what I've always been fascinated with in creating art is bringing together elements that don't necessarily have anything to do with each other. And the only relationship they have is that I decided to put them together in the same place and time. And then that automatically gives them a relationship. So an example of that would be the relationship of the balloons in the film. The balloons are hanging in front of me from a storefront. They're moving, and I almost bring them in as characters in the film, as if they're responding or reacting to what's happening sometimes. So they don't necessarily fit there, except that I decided to put them there and make them fit there. I really see the work as being more of an audio monologue, and it's difficult for me to present something like that because in my mind can move slowly enough that I can sit in a dark theater and do nothing but listen. But I think people are a bit more fidgety and expectant on that level. So in terms of presenting the audio monologue, I feel like people are yearning to look at something. Mm. And so I've been working with found footage for a couple of years now. Sometimes the relationship of elements in a work of art are very distant. Sometimes they're close together. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they fuse. And there is a randomness sometimes where they're constantly moving, where the audio and the film do come close together. And then other times they're very distant. And I realize that there's some disattachment between the narrative and the visuals. And that's something that I yearn to refine a little bit more, but I'm also very, very satisfied with that distance.
I'd also like to hear more about physically enhanced by a special spider derived serum by Navanjali. So Navanjali, if you would like to speak about your piece.
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I guess, is there a specific question about it, or would you just like me to talk about it?
I'd love for you to talk about it.
Okay. Basically, the image started with a memory of my parents' home. And I think that's the bulk of what my work is about, is referencing memory and home. My parents immigrated here from India in the late 70s, and I was born here. So my work is really considering hybridity and elements of third space and negotiating two different cultures. So this figure comes from a wall hanging in my parents' bedroom. And as it works through my hands, it's morphing and changing. And I love that you commented on the title. I have a 7-year-old son who loves Spider-Man. And that is coming from lots of time reading books and watching movies. And I felt like this palette was a nod to the Spider-Man that I see around my home.
We do have 2 people who have honorable mentions here. If you guys do want to speak about your work, there's Ready to Howl with Barbara and Muse with Sophia. If you guys want to talk, okay, Sophia.
There. Okay, can you hear me?
Mhm.
So it was interesting that you remarked about how the techniques were used by women, when in fact a lot of handwork was and continues to be done by men. It's especially when you get to the couture level, a lot of the work is at least designed by men. That is incidentally my best friend, and I did that from a photograph from her wedding. I rendered it in black and white, high contrast, and then printed it on inkjet printable cotton and worked over that in the colors of the beads. And I have so many beads. And there was the moment when I said to my husband, I have an admission to make. And he said, what's that? And I said, I've run out of a color. And he was like, I can't believe it. So, so the background is all Minoan, and she's Greek. She has Minoan lineage. One of my favorite parts of this is the thin shirt around right in the front, because I wanted to make it look like fabric. So I painted the fabric underneath it, skin color, and then took long bugle beads, long white bugle beads, and ran pink thread through them. And then, so they're just long strands, and they actually shift when you're looking at the piece.
Part of my thinking on that statement is artists like Faith Ringgold, who used quilting, and a lot of feminist artists did use those materials that, I'm just going to put it this way, how's this, even if it's faulty, that we might traditionally associate. I actually think that everything about this is absolutely stunning. When you guys do your CVs or your resumes, or don't put that you got honorable mention, or first place or second place, just put award. Because I don't like the structure of honorable mentions. Just say award. It's accurate. Actually, if you got in the show, you're a winner.
The National Juried Exhibition for us as a small nonprofit is one of the gallery's largest fundraisers. I put a lot of effort into publicizing it enough to get 300 entries for this exhibition. So to be 30 out of 300 is really amazing.
Again, just let me congratulate everybody. This is a beautiful batch of work. Thank you.